Hi, Joy Olson here of Blockbuster Fundraising. Can you believe it's already October? Fourth quarter. Whoa! The final quarter of our fundraising year, and by far the most important ones. Well, October is a lot about crafting your content. In fact, I would say that is one of your top 3 responsibilities this month. You got to pull that year-end content together. And you know what that means? That means you got to dig into your inspiration folder that I hope you've got with all of the best year stories that you've been saving just for year end. What's going to work best with which segmented audience? You know, the experts say that when it comes to storytelling for nonprofits, you've got 7 different kinds of stories that your nonprofit can tell. Did you know that? So I thought that maybe while you're obsessing about crafting these year-end stories, that you'd like to take a look at what the 7 different opportunities are. Storytelling is it's all about your nonprofit. And it's one of those things that make up the core of the engagement that your donors have with you. It's so important. It's relationship building. And it has proven ability to cultivate these relationships. Stories build community, they boost involvement, and they bear your nonprofit soul. You know, stories are an indispensable piece of your nonprofit. So realizing storytelling's importance and gathering stories is one thing, one very important thing. But what kinds of stories can you craft? What types of stories should your nonprofit share? So let's answer these questions for you and give you some ideas on stories that you can tell for your year-end story, or one of the stories that you can tell. You'll be telling more than one. Your origin story. Let's start with your origin story, because every nonprofit has its own origin story, and it's your founding and creation story. And this certainly spotlights your history, and it shows the entire process of how your nonprofit was established from its initial conception into its existence right now. And the story of the founding of your organization operates externally in that it gives your donors, your audience, a peek into the people and the work that went behind it at its very beginnings. So by illustrating how you got your start, you can also show its evolution from the values that were your nonprofit's building blocks to the beliefs behind the way your nonprofit operates today. So although your founding story is principally used externally in order to help others learn more about your nonprofit in a personal way as an organization, it is also useful internally as well. And you know who said that? Andy Goodman, and he's with the Bridgespan Group, and he is an expert at storytelling and what nonprofits should be telling, and he emphasizes the usefulness of your founding story within your nonprofit itself. I think that's such a good idea. I know I've been a member of Rotary now for over 20 years. And sometimes I look at the new members and I think, gosh, it's really a shame that they don't have a couple of these great stories that I know of that happened 20 years ago that really would inspire them. So stories about your founding and about going back in your history can really be inspiring to your staff. So a common question, Goodman says, ask of the CEO and the board and the staff and the volunteers is how the nonprofit got its start. And, hey, if the board and the staff and the volunteers and the CEO cannot answer that question, then it's difficult for an outsider to expect that they could answer any other questions about the organization. So you want to have a good story about your founding and share that with your staff and your volunteers and your board, because these groups mentioned are those groups who are most intimately engaged with your nonprofit and therefore should certainly know the story of its creation. So in its basic sense, if your own people don't know your origins, how can you expect them to be deeply connected to your nonprofit? So crafting an origin story that balances itself between being self-serving and self-deprecating, or giving the existing origin story a fresher look, can be a bit of a challenge. There is a blog called Getting Attention that Nancy Schwartz writes, and she says there are 4 steps that you can take to do that and do it well. First, keep the focus on the founders of the organizations. Find out the why behind their passion to bring this nonprofit to life. And if a founder is no longer living, ask around, do some investigative work, and interview longtime donors, board members, employees, and even relatives. And you know what? You're going to unearth some really nifty stories. I just know you will. Okay, secondly, what can you do? You can show the founder's motivation behind the nonprofit and make it relatable. Like perhaps a founder had a loved one who was homeless. That's why they created a nonprofit to help the homeless get back on its feet. Third, illustrate how the founder used good old-fashioned problem solving to create this nonprofit by figuring out the problem and making the nonprofit the solution to that problem. Fourthly and lastly, highlight the work of the founder and others who were there at the beginning of the nonprofit and what they did in order to form this nonprofit and open its doors. Okay, there's your first really good idea for a story, your origin story. Second idea is your focus story. Now, this kind of story is about your mission, the values behind that mission, and how that mission approached in a way that is singular to your nonprofit, its strengths. Values, like we mentioned in the origin story, are the building blocks of your organization. It is your values and beliefs that really drive the action that you take as a nonprofit. The kinds of stories that demonstrate this are stories of real-life people, of how those within your nonprofit have expressed and carried out the values and beliefs that are at the very center of your organization. So, instead of just listing off values and beliefs, Goodman says, show how your nonprofit lives up to them and how they communicate them through words, stories, and action, the work that you do in order to tell a story about your nonprofit's focus and strengths. Well, let's go back to the blog because Schwartz offers a few tips here too on the focus story. She says, show a clear line between the work your nonprofit does and the results of it, such as the recipients, those who benefit from your work. These stories are meant to differentiate you from other and similar nonprofits to showcase how your organization's particular focus or approach adds value to the community that you serve, and moves your issue or cause forward in a way that is unmatched by other organizations. They make your nonprofit stand out in order to get it out there out front. And that is important. You want to shuffle yourself right to the top of the list. You also want to accentuate the uniqueness and strengths of your nonprofit. If one of your nonprofit's values is cooperation, show how your nonprofit has made partnerships with other nonprofits who share a similar or related mission. And you want to keep the personal touch and tell a detailed story as if to someone who is not familiar with the issues at hand and they're not familiar with your nonprofit. Engage the eye with visuals. After creating or revamping your focus story, look back at your mission statement to make sure that they are still aligned with each and communicate the same things. That's good advice there. Line up with your mission statement. That's always a good advice for your theme, your content. You always want to review your mission statement your fourth quarter and make sure that everything is aligned. All right, how about another idea for a story? How about this? The challenge story. So while your nonprofit can certainly weave your focus story in with the challenge story, the challenge story can also stand on its own, as it can highlight a very specific problem or a force that is standing in the way of your nonprofit's mission. In this story, your nonprofit is meant to illustrate the problem you are trying to solve, not through numbers, but through people. Through the telling of this story, your nonprofit can show how your organization is making an impact through its work to solve a particular problem, thereby fulfilling its mission. Vanessa Chase Lokshin, I'm sure you know of her. She's written a great storytelling book. She also calls this type of narrative the overcoming adversity story. So in it, your protagonist, which is of course the hero or the main character, whichever your nonprofit chooses to call it, your protagonist faces struggle, strife, and then triumph with the help of your nonprofit, with the help of your donors and supporters. So when you break down this kind of story let's work with an example. Say you have a protagonist, and it's a young mother living in a village in an impoverished country, and the struggle is getting access to clean water for her family, and the strife and the conflict is making a journey miles on foot every day to the nearest and cleanest well in the area. And then the triumph through the help of a nonprofit whose mission is access to clean water. Wells are built in this young mother's village in order to bring the water to her and the rest of her fellow villagers. So this is a very simple example, but it employs all of the elements outlined above, and it even goes the extra mile to focus on one person, the young mother, not a whole group of mothers. And this is important to remember. You are going to have a much better story. It's going to be much more relatable if it's about one person, one animal, one person, one animal. You get the point, right? Don't make it about a group. All right. How about another idea for a story, for content for year-end? Your impact story. Now, although this is related to the overcoming adversity story, this type of story focuses primarily on the end result of your nonprofit's involvement, its impact. And this story is meant to show progress, the before and after, how your nonprofit, with the help of your donor, solves the problem, and how your nonprofit and its supporters make an impact in its own unique way. Now, telling this story comes also with its own steps, and again, we go back to Schwartz for that outline. Here's what she says. Show how your nonprofit affects the lives of those at its center, focusing on one person, group, or family. The more specific you can be, the better the engagement your audience has to the story. Again, show the before and after. Make an effort to thoroughly explore the process of your nonprofit's work from beginning to end. Include testimonials from those at ground level, from volunteers to those who were helped. Then wrap things up nicely with a call to action. Because we all know that content, especially at this time of year, means call to action. You can slip that call to action in more than just once, and more than at the end of the story too. More about that later in this quarter. Okay, now let's get back to stories. What kind of stories can you tell? Well, how about stories about making connections? So let's go back to Vanessa Chase's expert advice on this, because she says that this particular story style seeks to reach out to a different and specific demographic that is still related to your nonprofit and its mission. To hear the voices of those who do not always appear on nonprofit testimonial campaigns. The best way to explain this kind of story is again by example. So listen up. Say that your nonprofit's mission is to collect donations to help cover hospital expenses for terminally ill children and their families. Your nonprofit wants to run a specific storytelling campaign. However, you want to approach things at a different angle, through connection-building storytelling instead of interviewing the children, their families, or their doctors for testimonials. Try to have conversations with the people behind the scenes. These are the people who are there every day at Ground Zero. The nurses who check on them, keep them comfortable, even hold their hand when they're afraid during checkups. Hospital volunteers who keep them company, whether through playing games or watching movies with them. Physical therapists who help the children with mobility as needed. And social workers who help the family gain access to appropriate resources. Psychologists who help the children work through their feelings throughout the entire process and provide mental support. So reaching out and collecting testimonials from these other, sometimes forgotten groups of people will help your storytelling campaign resonate with those people, maybe even inspiring them to give to your nonprofit, volunteer, or even join your board. And they will certainly be heartwarming stories that your donors will enjoy hearing. So how about this for an idea for storytelling? A portrait of your nonprofit. Paint a picture of your nonprofit by creating stories through profiles of your staff, volunteer, board members, and donors, individuals from a group in need. This puts a face to the people in your organization, emphasizing that you are an organization of human beings working for a mission, not a cold and calculating money-collecting machine. And Schwartz, once again, helps us create these profiles through these following steps. She says, pick individuals to be stand-ins as representative for the types of people that you want to capture, whether it's volunteers, prospective and established donors, staff, board, members, etc., so that they can have someone to relate to. Flesh out the profiles of these stand-ins to illustrate in a very personal way why each person would want to contribute. Like, for example, they knew someone in a similar situation. So keep an everyday life aspect to your stories. Don't reach for uncommon stories, as they may alienate your donors or they may not communicate the message of your story as well. You want to tell something that you're excited to tell because it means a lot to you. It means a lot to someone that is involved in the story. It's heartfelt, and that will show through. So again, it's all in the details. Those are the elements that will serve to build up the story in your audience's imagination. And that's where stories live, in their imagination. They imagine themselves being there. They're very empathetic to it. They're with you. Hey, how about this for stories? Gather testimonials. Of course, you want to finish with your call to action. And of course, you want to throw that call to action in there more than just once, a few times. And on the other side of the coin, taken along with your portrait of your nonprofit and profiles of the people who work within it, there are also what Goodman cites as the, quote, striving to improve, quote, story. Striving to improve. Now, this story shows that your nonprofit is made up of human components, and that as humans, we make mistakes. However, that is not the sole focus on the story. The narrative shows that your nonprofit and its people learn from its mistakes and move on. All the better for it afterwards. So this demonstrates growth, something that is so integral to a nonprofit and its success. I think this could be really difficult to do really well. And Goodman steps in here again and says that underlying this story, it's meant for internal use in order to combat what he calls the profane bundle. These stories are important to your organization because they foster positivity as opposed to the negative stories that can arise internally. He puts it as the old, quote, "Let me tell you how things really work around here." Quote, "This maintains transparency, something that is extremely important to your nonprofit's external reputation, but it's equally important within it." You know how I think this is a little tricky, but I think that if your nonprofit has in the past run into a pretty big problem that you came through that problem with your donors' help, and it could have turned out totally different for your nonprofit had they not been there for you, had they not believed in you, had they not supported you. And this is a meaningful story to tell because it shows your strength and your comeback power and what the people that support you can really do when the going gets tough. You needed them, and they were there for you. All right, let's talk about the final story here, the road ahead, your future story. The story of your nonprofit's future is both the most straightforward and complex story to write. Again, Schwartz calls this the change that you want to make in the world or what your world will lead to. It can also be classified as your nonprofit's vision statement, the story that will show what things will look like if your nonprofit is able to completely fulfill its mission. And this story, your future, is especially powerful because even though your nonprofit may not have a vision statement, the idea of running a nonprofit is to address the needs present and then on into the future until there is no longer a need. So I think that that's something to really think about. And Goodman says that where nonprofits falter in telling this story of their future is that they focus too much again on the numbers. He says numbers are great for filing away in reports, but not for drawing people in. Put into words what it is that you see as the future of those you serve, not your organization. Take them to the future that you envision. Show them the future. And so long as your nonprofit doors remain open and has the intention to continue its service, the future story can be told. Just remember that content is so important, so don't wait any longer to put your stories together and talk about them, and how did the characters change in your stories, and how did the world change, and why is that change significant, especially as it relates to your donor. So these are the questions that you should keep in the back of your mind when crafting your story from scratch, especially if it's an original untold story. So if you and your organization are doing things that no one else is, you need to tell people about it. More importantly, you need to tell them about it in such a way that they won't be able to forget. So what did the community look like before your organization started? What did the world look like? What does it look like now? If you can find a specific example to build your story around, it can be a person whose life you've changed or could change, or an organization which benefited from your work. So you want to use these type of examples and give your story a human element, a phenomenon with which others can directly relate and empathize. So you've got this, I'm sure. And we will be talking much more about storytelling. Pick up Vanessa Chase Lockshin's book. It's absolutely wonderful. Give you all kinds of great ideas. Hey, Joy Olson, Blockbuster Fundraising. Happy to have been here with you today. I hope you got some good ideas, maybe about news stories that you can tell. Find out more at Joy Olson Group or Blockbuster Fundraising and blockbusterfundraising.com, where we have our blog. Hey, hundreds of free fundraising video tips on our Blockbuster Fundraising YouTube channel. And on Instagram, we've started printing our daily tip countdown for 2018. So lots of help out there for you. We hope to inspire you, to be there for you, to be your cheerleader. And we know you're doing great things, and we support that. And here's to you. Thanks for having been here. Bye-bye.